My name is Aisha. I'm here from London, the Dialogue Society. My first question is for our last speaker, Ayhan Hocam. And I did leave partway through your speak, so hopefully I'm not asking a question to something you've already answered. Towards the end, you were mentioning the hesitancy of some people's, perhaps the change in thought that they've had, but a hesitancy to take action for the human rights abuses that are happening in South Africa as people who are in a new host country. Do you think that is perhaps further work that needs to be done in terms of the Hizmet people and the sincerity for issues such as racism? I mean, has the change really happened? If they can change in thought, perhaps, if they were back in Turkey, would those who say that now I would stand up for Kurdish rights, would they do so, do you think, if they were back in Turkey? That was just kind of a broader question that I have, because the national and nationalistic undertones of Turkish identity is very heavily still quite present with a lot of Turks, I think. And I think the recent earthquake and the reactions to it show that, I mean, the majority of people impacted by the earthquake were of ethnic minorities, it being in southeast Turkey and northern Syria, which is heavy Kurdish majority region, and you know, the structural inequalities of 100 years of Turkish history, for example. I haven't heard a Turkish person bring up and discuss and see how that could have had an impact. So that was just something that I wanted to throw out there. For Vonya, I wanted to ask, was there a particular reason for focusing on women? Have you had a chance to hear accounts of men in males' prisons, and if there is a comparison at all in how that impacts their well-being as well? And to the first two speakers who spoke together, Julie and Elise, I think it's great, the kind of experiences that you shared, and I have seen it myself as an insider to the movement. Have there been any efforts that you've seen of kind of Hizmet people who now have some sort of expertise in kind of inverted commas, that can they use that expertise to somehow help other migrant or refugee communities, because it's an issue which is growing by millions in other countries as well. So those are my three questions.
Okay, let's go with Ayhan Bey first.
Okay, so thank you. So I asked exactly the same question to our participants. So I think it depends on their role in the Hizmet movement and their occupation. So when I talked to one of the lawyers who are in South Africa now, the same question, he said, it would be my first priority if I go back to Turkey. So I'm going to leave everything, and it is going to be my job to defend and protect the human rights of those, you know, minority or marginalized groups. So I think yes, so it has a big shift in their first perception, and if they find an opportunity, I believe so they will do much better than what they did about human rights issues.
Okay, and now for Vonya.
So specifically, this study was conducted for women. I can tell you that through RUSU, Refugees Unknown Stories Untold, that I have collected many stories from men. That is another study to be done in of itself. Those stories tend to have more concentration on torture, I would say, unfortunately. But yeah, so for this one, it was important because there were people on the ground. And I also forgot to mention while I was up here, and I think it's very important that I do, that there are many AST volunteers here, and they've been very supportive of this study. So thank you to those AST volunteers.
Okay, Elise and Julia.
Hi. So sorry. Just to.
Can't hear you.
I blew it out.
There it is.
Okay. Hi. Just to understand the question, it was you were asking if their experiences have.
Do you want to come up here?
Yeah. have a technology glitch. It happens to me every time I try to use a Xerox machine. I always, it's just, I don't know. So just to understand, the question was that their experiences, have they maybe translated those into working with other migrant or refugee groups?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits of having the strong soul that you mentioned, for example, is, I think, very evident with movement, but is that still something that those who have perhaps now kind of integrated into Canada being able to provide to others?
Yes, I think initially, I think we're probably going to start seeing more of that as people undergo, more training or they get different degrees. A number of actually, I can think of 3 interviewees who went back to law school in Canada, and they are specifically going into immigration law. I know another interviewee did some sort of like 8-month training program to help immigrants and refugees. So I do think a lot of the experience is translating. I think there often has to be a professional qualification or licensure of some sort, but I would, of the interviewees I've done, I would say probably roughly off the top of my head, about a third are going into some sort of profession where that they could use that. So good question. Thank you.
All right, we have time for another question or another few questions. Let's see if that microphone works now. Go ahead.
Is this working? Is this working?
There we go.
Yes.
This is for Vonya, and it's a really quick question. Why were there only 42% of the respondents who lost faith in government? That may seem like it's tongue in cheek, but it's a very serious question. Why were the other 58
Yep.
still responding positive?
That's a great question. Of course, one of the ones that I didn't anticipate that I might get. But, when I was looking at the data from the study, I wondered the same thing. My guess is that they're fearful to indicate an answer. In fact, I'm not sure I would even say it's a guess. I'd say 99%, they're fearful to give an answer.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So this is Mehmet Coach from the Journalist and Rights Foundation. My question is to the research study by our Canadian participants and researchers. I know for a fact that we work with the refugee resettlement of Turkish for Hizmet followers in Canada and other countries as well. So we know there's the Canadian Immigration and Refugee Services. They are also conducting research and the integration of Hizmet movement followers in Canada, and especially after the field coup attempt. So they are sharing their findings with the government officials who make decisions on policy and practices as they make decisions for refugee resettlement programs. So my question is, are you planning to share your findings with the government officials for possible policy change to have more refugees different followers from different countries with the great needs that we have a lot of people who are stuck in different parts of the world, and mostly from the countries. So what are your future actions with the finding your research?
I'll spare everybody. Thank you for that information. Yes, ideally, I would like to put this research into some sort of practical and helpful application. So, for sure, yes. Yeah, thank you for the encouragement as well.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is for Mr. Soltes. After the war, did you see any of the
Can you speak more directly into the microphone, please?
persecuted people from Germany? Did they return the country to rebuild the country, and you see gratitude for Turkish people as well, because there is emotional breakup?
Obviously, Germany, thanks to Hitler, was a mess by the end of the war, and it took a long time for Germany to rebuild itself. It was further hampered by the fact that post-war there was a Cold War, so that divided Germany between the two sides. And so the reconstruction and the rebuilding, which was mostly evident in the West, took time, and obviously a unification took even longer, and Germany still has problems. So I'm not a prophet, I'm a historian, but if I look at Turkey, I would anticipate that inshallah when Mr. Erdogan and his regime are gone, First of all, it's not going to be simple and straightforward for Hizmet to re-engage because he has been very effective in convincing many Turks that Hizmet is a danger and not a positive force. But I do anticipate, I expect unequivocally, that it will gradually return, and that Turkey, because all the things that made Turkey such a positive factor on the Middle East and world scenes before the last decade or so, will play out in its returning to a position of prominence and importance to repeat all of those reasons. So I am optimistic about that as well, although it'll be slow moving. By the way, the things that each of my other speakers has said have also corroborated the idea that Hizmet has continued to evolve. Mr. Gülen's thinking evolved. He started out interested in Turkish Muslims and realized that that's not where his interest ultimately should reside, because if we're not in it for all of us, in the end, none of us benefits. And so his vision expanded exponentially, and often ahead of that of his followers. And I've watched his followers catching up. Like I said, the participation of women, which is essential in any and every corner of this planet, and underplayed in most corners of this planet, is starting to play out more effectively within the Hizmet world. The interest, the question that was just asked about Hizmet people being interested in other than Turks or other than Hizmet people, that's a growth factor that you pointed out and that you pointed out with respect to two completely different kind of worlds. So yes, 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 yes. Not easy, but I'm optimistic about the future on all kinds of fronts.
Yes, please.
From San Antonio, Texas, University of Pandya, as well as the Great Foundation. So my question is to Dr. Soltes. So you mentioned Hoca Efendi is keeping himself back. So one changes maybe, or you can say after 2013 or after the 2016 interview call. And can you talk about some specific changes you observed as a transformed movement after that period, and also what kind of changes you would expect more to be served, not only maybe Turkey, as a global world?
Sure. Again, I have seen in a number of instances, as we say, with my own eyes, heard with my own ears, things that have reflected two very specific developments since 2016. I think I mentioned that I was at a retreat, and maybe I didn't, intended to, in December of 2016 in Ocean City in Maryland, a Hizmet retreat. And two of the things that stood out, or three of the things that stood out. One, obviously the concern that everyone had about where are we going? And I think for the first time embedded in that concern was the question of, and where will we go when Fethullah Gülen is no longer among us? And on the other hand, the other two things I saw were that those who spoke on behalf of Gülen to the retreat kept emphasizing the idea of patience, sabr, patience, patience, and of not only not being violent, but not being vengeful in any way, shape, or form. Gülen has many times repeated that if Erdogan turned around and realized what he was doing and stopped doing it and asked forgiveness for doing it, in an instant, Gülen would embrace him. He would have no need or desire to punish him, to be vengeful against him. And the third thing was, it was my first acquaintance with young Hizmeti. I spoke with 15 kids, they were 18 to 30, and both their energy and the issue of female participation was very emphatic there. So if I now multiply that multifold, because now it's 7 years later, the conference I mentioned last week, my visit to Hoca Efendi in November, and the retreat center where I happened to coincide with a bunch of leaders all around the country who were gathering together, led me to this realization of how it's not immediate, how he has been gradually stepping back. That has always been his intention. Just as he never wanted anything to be called Gülen movement because he's far too self-effacing, he wants George Danikian, an Armenian, Greek, Turkish, Australian, whom I interviewed in Sydney and ran into again in Washington, made the comment, Hoca Efendi never tells you what to do. he always says, you've got to think for yourself. You've got to decide. You know better than I because you know yourself, you know the world better than I, and that's just multiplied. So my sense is that across the Hizmet world, greater and greater autonomy and greater what was fear in the year or so after July 2016 has gradually transformed into a kind of conviction that we can move forward. When I was last in Tbilisi and a number of the people I ran into had just come, guys who'd just come over the border after having been hiding for a year, they said, when you go back, if you see Gulen, tell him, we're doing fine. He doesn't have to worry about us. And they were, and they are. And the whole project of Erdogan has backfired because Hizmet has become stronger, not weaker, because of what he has done. The only ones who have been negatively impacted are all those poor Turks and people in other places whose schools were shut down, who so desperately need education, of which he has deprived them. He has deprived Turkey of its future, but it's going to have a future in spite of him. He has not deprived Hizmet of its future, which will have a future in spite of him. End of sermon.
Yeah, good.
Beautiful presentation. Thank you for watching everybody here, especially representation, Dr. Soltes, about how so many things overlap with the German history that is tragic and very eye-opening. But my question is to Elise, to Elise. And you know, of course, I think your research was on Ontario. Is that correct? Are you going to expand your research to Quebec area? I was in Canada in December, and you're saying that the Islamophobia is on the rise, and especially on the French part of Canada. I mean, with regard to the Western Hemisphere, Canada really seems to be on the top of the list of Islamophobic countries. So if there is any implication to your research on that front, then my second question is to Vonya. I noticed the ratio there, like 12 to 15% who said they changed their beliefs. I mean, I was also told 42%, but that was what I noticed. How do they characterize their change of beliefs? What does that mean?
Okay, before you answer, I just want to make it clear that that's the last question, or two questions that we have time for. So you guys have each about 2 minutes per question. Go ahead.
Thank you for that. Hi, thank you. Yes, as I said, the research was started in 2018 and suffered a disruption because of COVID, so it's really kind of undergoing. And yes, I would definitely like to expand to other provinces. And if you could please talk to my university about funding, that would be lovely. But yes, the plan is to go further. And it's interesting you mentioned Quebec because a number of people, I mentioned the Roxham Road, so a number of my interviewees crossed and went to Montreal initially. And a number of them, for a variety of reasons, some of this kind of unwelcoming or maybe a touch of Islamophobia, ended up relocating to the GTA or Greater Toronto area because of that. So that would be a very interesting study in contrast as well. Thank you.
Hakan, your second question was for Vonya, right?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So the question I believe was on the statistic. The question I believe was on the statistic on changing the beliefs. I'm not online right now, so I can't go back and look like specifically at that area. But, you know, because it was a qualitative study, excuse me, in interviewing, I believe that, you know, that's a difficult thing to kind of track as data. However, you know, whether it was pursued more into that question, have your beliefs changed? I'm not sure. I need to go back and look. And I'd be more than willing to answer that for you.